The purpose of this meeting is to receive a briefing in relation to the findings of research on Undocumented in Ireland. Briefing has been circulated to members. I wish to welcome Ms. Helen Lowry here today. You're most welcome. Thanks for being here. Ms. Edel, McGinley, thanks for being here. And Mr. Jayson Montenegro, very much. Thanks for being here as well today. The format is I'll ask you to make a short presentation, opening statement of around 5 minutes or thereabouts, and then we'll have a question and answer session with members on the issues that you're bringing to our attention today. Before we begin, I have to draw the attention of witnesses to the matter in relation to privilege. Please note that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, you are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of any evidence you give. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name in such ways to make him her identifiable. And members should also be aware that under the salient rulings of the Chair, members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official by name in such ways to make him or her identifiable. Ms. Lowry, I believe you're starting off. Okay.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson, Deputies and Senators. On behalf of the Migrant Rights Centre Ireland and the 900 members of our Justice for the Undocumented campaign group, we would like to very much thank the committee for their time today and for hearing us on our presentation. My name is Helen Lowry. I'm Community Work Coordinator with the Migrant Rights Centre. To my right is Edel, McGinley, our Director and previous Coordinator of the campaign, and to my left is Jayson Montenegro, a member of the Leaders Group of the JFU campaign. Just briefly, in terms of the MRCI, we have been working with undocumented migrants for over 14 years, and since 2001 have really been taking a stand with migrant workers on rights issues through service provision, advocacy and policy change. Jayson's going to share his own story and say a few short words, and then I will conclude.
So, Mr. Montenegro, you want to make a presentation now, please?
Yes. My name is Jayson. I'm from Philippines, and I'm living and working in Ireland for 11 years. I'm undocumented. Back in 2004, I look at my children and ask myself, can I give them a good life or will be the same as me? Working hard but getting nowhere. As a father, you don't want to see that. You want to give your children a good future, so I left the Philippines and came here. For my first 6 years in Ireland, I worked in maintenance, cleaning, and painting. A 3D job we call dirty, difficult, and dangerous. I wasn't paid much, but the employer promised me a work permit, and I was learning a lot. I stayed. It wasn't until I came to Migrant Rights Centre Ireland for advice that I discovered there had never been any chance of getting me a work permit. I am now working as a carer, looking after an elderly person. I've been working as a carer for over 4 years. I have always worked for the 11 years I am here. When I first left, my youngest was 5. He kept asking me, when I coming back? He's 17 now. And he's not stopped asking. He wants to be a pilot, and he has the grades, and he's doing well in school. That's the reason I'm still here, to continue to fund my youngest education, to give him opportunities I never had. With the money I earn, my 2 daughters have gone to college. One had a degree in IT, the other one in midwifery. I put my sister-in-law through college and support my parents when my father's heart condition stopped him from working. This month last year, my father passed away suddenly during a routine operation. The last time I saw him was 2004 when I left the Philippines to come to Ireland for work. Not being there for his funeral was the hardest time in my life. Watching in the sky or being unable to comfort my mother was difficult beyond words. My family is in the Philippines. I'm a foreigner now there. That will break my heart. This is where I live, work. This is where I live and work. I have friends here. Also, I'm still supporting my children to finish education. I am the same situation as the thousands of undocumented Irish in the United States. My story is their story. We have the very same hopes and dreams, and we too deserve a chance to regularize our status. We're calling for a reasonable solution. We could forward pay a fee, have our situation assessed on case-by-case basis. It will be transparent, straightforward, and fair. I am very happy to be here today to share my story, but I am one of thousands of people in this situation. We are asking for a chance to be recognized and contribute more formally to Irish society. We are not recent arrival to Ireland. We are here long term. We put down roots and are making valuable contribution. We have been calling for regularization for over 7 years. We believe it's time for change. We would love to see the same political leadership as President Barack Obama has shown in the United States. I know that a member of this committee values fairness, equality, and justice, and I hope that you will support our recommendation for introduction of regularization here in Ireland in the lifetime of this government.
Thank you, Mr. Montenegro. Thank you for that. Ms. Lowry, you wish to continue?
Thank you. So the Migrant Rights Centre Ireland was set up in 2001 and we've been working with undocumented migrants since the beginning. We operate a very busy drop-in centre, very busy city centre drop-in centre that provides information and support. And just to give you a sense of the numbers of people, in a period of 2009 to October 2014, we provided information and support to over 2,644 undocumented migrants from over 96 different countries, all living here on average 8 years. We established the Justice for the Undocumented campaign group just over 4 years ago in an effort to progress a policy solution and advocate for change in this area. To date, successive governments haven't done a huge amount to address the situation of undocumented migrants, which we find increasingly worrying in a diverse Ireland where we've had inwards migration for over 15 years now, where undocumented migrants have put down roots and are making a valuable contribution. We think the improved economy and significant length of time undocumented migrants are now living here makes this an opportune time to bring about a comprehensive solution. In terms of numbers, it's obviously not possible to categorically state the number of undocumented migrants here in Ireland. However, it is possible to make a well-informed estimate, which is clearly critical in the planning of any policy response, and we appreciate that, and we've done a lot of work in this area. Based on research carried out by the Migrant Rights Centre Ireland, and we can provide a breakdown of how we devise this figure, we estimate there's between 20 and 26,000 undocumented migrants living and working in Ireland. In our experience, the vast majority of undocumented migrants have entered Ireland legally and have been working here for many years. Indeed, our survey, which I'll mention now, with over 540 undocumented migrants, found that over 92% of people had entered the country legally and became undocumented afterwards. Undocumented migrants in Ireland you can become undocumented for a variety of reasons. Undocumented migrants in Ireland can be broadly described under the following categories. And obviously this needs careful consideration, again, in any potential regularisation scheme. So, for example, visa overstayers, including tourists, people from non-visa required countries, student visa holders and others. Migrants with unenforced deportation orders who are not in a position to leave the state. And finally, children of undocumented migrants. We estimate that there are between 2,000 and 5,000 children of undocumented migrants in Ireland at the moment, and we're particularly concerned about their precarious future in growing up in a country where they have a very uncertain future. In terms of the situation and contribution of undocumented migrants, similar to the undocumented Irish in the United States, there's obviously a lot of stress and fear in terms of being undocumented. We find that the people we work with encounter significant problems in accessing basic and essential services. We're particularly concerned about the high rate of non-compliance and workplace exploitation that's experienced by people who are working. It's very hard to advocate for your employment rights when you are deported. Undocumented migrants fear authorities, in particular the Gardaí, and are reluctant to report crimes such as domestic violence, theft and racist incidences for fear of detection. We are, as I mentioned, particularly concerned about the vulnerable situation of children of undocumented migrants, some of whom are born here, some of whom came here at a young age, who are growing up going to national and secondary school here and face very uncertain futures. To them, Ireland is very much home. I mentioned the research, and we've sent around the infographic and the research we did. We put a lot of work into that research. It was carried out by Jayson and his colleagues and ourselves in the MRCI. It was the first research of its kind in the country, carried out with 540 undocumented migrants. And the research speaks for itself, but just to highlight a couple of the statistics, 81% have been living in Ireland for 5 years or longer, 1 in 5 for over a decade, 87% of people were in employment, 92% were not in a formal legal process, so they weren't in a legal process with the state. So we're finding that a lot of people are in employment. 70% of the respondents were also working over 30 hours per week, a lot of minimum wage jobs that are essential to keep our economy and society functioning, such as restaurant and catering, domestic work, cleaning and maintenance. The findings of the research for us in the Migrant Rights Centre painted a very similar picture to that of the undocumented Irish living and working in the United States. Having worked directly with undocumented migrants for over 14 years, we do firmly believe it's now time to look closer to home, a diverse Ireland, a multicultural Ireland where migrants and their families have put down roots. Jayson has eloquently talked about the fact that he has the same struggles, hopes and dreams as undocumented Irish in the United States. I am regularly, as somebody who's working with the undocumented campaign here, humbled by the significant sacrifices undocumented families we work with are making to ensure their children and extended family members have opportunities in life that they did not. We appreciate that our leaders and delegates and committee members have in the past and are now, particularly around St. Patrick's Day, travelling to the United States for a number of reasons, one of which will be to highlight the situation of the undocumented migrants, and we commend this. And we would like to bring the gaze closer to home in terms of the situation of undocumented migrants here. To close, MRCI is about working on problems and offering solutions. We have been putting forward a proposal to introduce a regularisation. We believe this situation can best be addressed by an introduction of a policy measure allowing for the administration of a once-off, time-bound regularisation scheme. This could be implemented in tandem with other solutions for those living in DP, etc. A scheme such as this can be introduced as part of a policy package and does not require legislation. I think that's an important point. And actually, in the past, we've had the IBC scheme and the undocumented workers scheme as two other examples of common sense schemes that were brought in as part of a managed migration policy here in Ireland. We see this scheme as being pragmatic, enforceable, clear and fair, and it responds to, rather than rewarding, illegality. We think there needs to be clear criteria in order to identify people, in order to administer the scheme in the Department of Justice. So we have suggested the following criteria could apply. First of all, length of time in the state. All persons resident in Ireland 4 years would be eligible to register for the scheme. A criminal bar, similar to other programmes implemented in OECD countries, of which there are many, and the European Union, a criminal bar may apply where this would exclude all persons with a serious criminal conviction. And number 3, the implementation of a probationary period. We've suggested this because it gives migrants a window of time to register for the scheme and potentially pay a fee. They are temporarily regularised and enter into a 2-year probationary period, much like the successfully recently administered 2004 Student Probationary Extension Scheme. It serves a number of purposes. It gives the department an opportunity to administer the scheme. We appreciate this will take some people hours. We appreciate it takes a bit of organisation. It serves as a protection element upholding the integrity of the immigration system. And it gives INIS and Justice control over the process and puts in place a number of conditions that applicants must satisfy in order to secure residency. During the probationary period, undocumented migrants will be issued with a temporary status or visa, have the right to work without a work permit so they can formalise their employment situation, and have the right to travel to a maximum of 3 months of the year back to maybe the home country. This is, I think, an important point I wanted to raise. The administration and cost of the scheme, we estimate, would be in and around 3 million. However, the projected income from the scheme would far exceed this. We believe the scheme would bring in an annual income in excess of 7.5 million through direct taxation. A once-off fee will generate over 11.5 million. Ongoing immigration registration fees will generate an annual income of 5 million. And finally, income brought in through employer PRSI contributions will generate 20 million per year. In total, this scheme has the potential to generate 185 million over 5 years, and that's a conservative estimate. This offsets any resource implications for the introduction of such a scheme and contributes significantly to the tax purse. There are other benefits of the scheme. The committee members will be very aware of this in the context of communities and social cohesion. Many of you are in constituencies and in work with very diverse communities. Security, keeping in step with international practice and a humanitarian concern. We also believe at this stage it's the right thing to do, and it's also the responsible thing to do. We have a number of recommendations for action. First of all, MRCI is calling on the Minister for Justice and Equality to introduce a once-off, time-bound regularisation scheme with transparent criteria in the lifetime of the current government. Secondly, MRCI would very much hope that the committee can support this recommendation. Thirdly, to progress this urgent matter, we would also respectfully propose that the committee could either A, appoint a rapporteur to work with the MRCI and others to develop a set of recommendations to put forward to the Minister, or that B, that the MRCI could send in a formal proposal with a recommendation to the committee for review and for endorsement to the Minister. We again thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lowry and Mr. Montenegro, for making those presentations. Mr. Montenegro, very powerful presentation. In fact, congratulations. It can't have been easy for you to do that there. Obviously, we're aware of the number of people who've been before the citizenship ceremonies in the last while, many tens of thousands at this stage. And this is another area, I think, where we need to give some attention. I know colleagues here are anxious to ask questions, and we have a situation where people will ask about 3 questions initially and go back again. We have questions rather than speeches you'll be glad to hear. So we'll start off with Dave McGinley, 3 questions.
Chairman, and thanks to all of you for the presentation. Jayson in particular, I listened to the piece on News Talk this morning, and I found it very moving. And then to hear your evidence today, I think it would be... I'll make these comments briefly, Chairman. Sorry, through the chair. I think it would be really insightful if Irish citizens who have a concern about, you often hear the phrase opening the floodgates and huge numbers coming in. They could just see, first of all, the testimony today from Jayson, which is the testimony that any Irish family has given, particularly across the west of Ireland, which has been heavily affected by immigration, and we argue for the regularisation of our own citizens who are based over there, who had to leave and have missed funerals, missed weddings, missed family occasions. The same arguments we make to Americans when we go out. So I suppose my questions are, when you put together, it strikes me that the proposals that you've put together are reasonable. They're clearly around people who've been here for a length of time, that have, who have actually contributed to our economy, and you've also put in the net substantial financial benefit to the state. So I just wanted to ask, you've clearly done that, mindful of maybe the concerns that would be out there in the Irish public, those unwarranted concerns, certainly based on these proposals of opening the floodgates. Maybe if you could talk more about that.
Ms. Lowry, do you want to take that point, please?
Yeah, and I'd imagine our director, Edel McGinley, would like to come in on this as well. Absolutely, we have a common sense approach in the Migrant Rights Centre to the problems we encounter. We've been working with undocumented migrants since the beginning, so we're very aware of how people are becoming undocumented. A lot of thought has been put into this, and quite a lot of research in terms of the concept of regularisation. And we feel clear criteria would, allay the public's fears, but also would be manageable from a Department of Justice perspective. And I think as well, we're looking at what we have found in the Migrant Rights Centre is that increasingly the people we're talking to and working with are here long term. So they're making a contribution, they are working, not all, but many are paying taxes, and it's got a situation where, so we're not talking about recent arrivals. And a regularisation such as this, particularly with the probationary period, allows an opportunity for the department to administer the scheme and to put, I suppose it's almost like a safety valve in place that would allow the scheme to be administered and for people in that period of time to abide by certain criteria. So that's in there as well, and it's on the basis, and we felt that 4 years was a fair period, and choices will have to be made potentially by the Minister for Justice and by the Department around some of this, around the administration of the scheme in further detail. So it's not a once-off such amnesty as such, because there is that probationary period built in. I think it's
Sorry, do you want to come in?
In relation to the pull factor, I suppose it hasn't been borne out in research that the introduction of regularisations are actually a pull factor. They're actually a pragmatic and fair response to a situation that has emerged over a long period of time. The drivers of migration generally are economic and family, so people move because of their economic needs and because of their family already in the state. There is one example of a pull factor in terms of regularisation, and that's along the border in the US. That's the only piece of research that has been done that looks at the potential of regularisation, and it's a very specific place. So it doesn't actually correlate to an island where we already are. So there is no actual research that really bolsters that particular pull factor argument.
Question, please.
I think that what stands out to me in the research you carried out was that almost 90% of the respondees, interviewees that are working, and that 80% have been here over 5 years. I think that's maybe if you could just talk more about the reason why I'm raising these questions, misconceptions in terms of in terms of the profile of the people, the families who are here already making a huge economic contribution and are in our schools and have hopes and dreams and want to make a huge contribution to our future. So I suppose I'd like you to elaborate more on that.
Okay. Take that point, please, that question.
We interviewed 540 undocumented migrants. 87% were in employment. 66.5% were with the same employer for over 2 years, and almost 30% were in the same job for longer than 5 years. We were actually even surprised by those last two statistics in terms of length of time with the same employer. We have found consistently that people are in medium to low wage work, but they're carrying out essential work that's at the moment, considering our projections into the future, employed in sectors that are absolutely essential to the function of the Irish economy and society. So, for example, care work, as Jayson talked about, the restaurant and catering industry, domestic work, so looking after older people, looking after children, looking after people with special needs, cleaning and maintenance, and other people in other jobs, all types of jobs. So absolutely, we have found categorically the vast majority of people are working. Not all people were paying tax, but over half had paid tax at some stage in their employment history, which I think says a lot, because as we know with the same with the undocumented Irish in the States, there is a risk inherent in using your social security number, or in Ireland's case, your PPS number, and fully disclosing and paying tax in terms of, being detected by the state. So people want to pay tax, they want to make a contribution. And as somebody was reminding me from the group yesterday, people want to work. People that were working, they have absolutely no access to social welfare. It's just not possible. People also don't want to, because in the long term, if they're applying for citizenship, it's not going to look favourably on a citizenship application if people have. So they can't in the first place, and secondly, they don't want it. They're here to work. Jayson was asked in the interview, and I'm glad you heard it this morning, Deputy McLaughlin, and he was asked what the first thing he would do when he got his papers, and Jayson said the first thing he would do is go home and see his children, and hopefully come back and finish his work here so his youngest can go through college. I think that's the same thing you'd hear from the vast majority of undocumented Irish in the United States. It's that idea of circular migration, being able to come and go, and people have put down roots, and I think that's the disconnect bit. People are here long term, and you've rightly said what we have found was 81% were in Ireland, a minimum of 5 years. Of that, though, 40% over 8 years, and 1 in 5 over a decade. They're not recent arrivals, they're people who have put down roots, and there's a couple of people in the gallery today who've got 2, 3 teenagers each. They've gone through secondary school. There's one woman with us today whose daughter was a straight A student and is currently unable to go to college, and is currently unable to work, and is having a very tough time, to say the least, with that, because in her mind she's Irish and she's grown up in Ireland. So that's the inside bit around that in terms of length of time. Absolutely, people have put down roots, and absolutely many are in employment.
Final question, Mr. Chairman, is one of the stories we all hear in relation to the undocumented Irish in the United States is obviously having to keep their head down and keep away from the authorities as a constant fear factor. So one of the things that struck me around your presentation when I read through was that, you know, you could have a situation where women are victims of domestic violence, victims of crime, and they're fearful of going to An Garda Síochána because obviously that brings themselves to the attention of the authorities. So maybe to talk about that impact on families.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I suppose we had a recent case of a woman whose house was broken into, and their savings were taken. They didn't have a bank account, so obviously all of their savings was there at €900, which was a huge amount of money. They have a small child back home. They couldn't report that to the Gardaí for fear of detection and deportation. So it is a huge issue. We do come across many people who have been in situations of domestic violence as well, where there is a fear. We come across people in terms of sometimes homelessness. There's a vulnerability, I suppose, associated with being undocumented, again, around earning money and the exploitation maybe that you do are subjected to in your employment as well. So there's a fear of even, I suppose, trying to assert your own power within an employment relationship, along with, being in a more serious situation, which might be around violence or theft.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Deputy. We'll come back to you if you need to later. Deputy McGrath, you indicated next.
Yes, Chair. First of all, I want to welcome Helen, Edel and Jayson, and thank you for your submission to the Oireachtas Committee on Justice, and also to say that I'd be very supportive of the general principle of the regularisation scheme for undocumented migrants in Ireland. And I think that from your point of view as well, I think the Migrant Centre in Ireland does an excellent job. I just want to commend your work because it is a very difficult job. And from listening to Jayson there, it's very emotional as well at sometimes. So I can imagine some of the cases you do it. So, Chair, my first question there is in relation to the figures of between 20,000 and 26,000 undocumented migrants. How do you come at that figure and where do you get that from? Particularly because in some other later on in one of your submissions, you talked about the fact that MRCI dealt with 2,644 undocumented migrants from 96 different countries. So where did you get the figure 26,000 from?
Okay, let's take that.
Yeah.
Ms. Lowry, okay. That's
fine. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy McGrath. We were very aware that we are meeting at times the tip of the iceberg in terms of people undocumented, and we have very close relationships with people undocumented through trust and through word of mouth. So we do deal with an awful lot of people. But as I said earlier on, we did do a bit of work at a well-calculated estimation. So in terms of the 20 to 26,000 persons, that's taken, information that's on public record with the Department of Justice. So, for example, the numbers of persons on deportation orders since 1999, the numbers enforced, the numbers not enforced, that's available to the public, so we're able to get that information. Then we a calculation of people who would have left voluntarily in that period, those in the what's called the Section 3 process, but people who've applied for humanitarian leave to remain, people who will have gotten that, people who won't have, and people who would have been refused it, and then also visa overstayers. Now, visa overstayers are a harder category of persons to calculate, or in the entire Irish undocumented population in the United States are probably visa overstayers. So what we used there was we based on a UK report. It's actually in the larger 8-page research paper you would have gotten. Ireland is Home. There's a very good explanation of the research methodology in that, because the UK population was more similar to our own from a global perspective, and we used a residual methodology, and it's been widely accepted as an expert way of doing a well-estimated calculation of undocumented persons, looking at who we know is undocumented and then doing a percentage version of that from a residual methodology perspective. So that's what we used, along with then our own ongoing case management system. We document every single person that comes through our doors and have that kind of data for 14 years now. So we combined all of that then, and we felt that there's a low, medium and high then in some of that. So we felt that 20 to 26 was a well-informed estimate. And what we took then in terms of calculating the 183 million and in terms of the contribution, that kind of stuff, we took a medium between the 20 and 26, and we used 23,000 as a figure then for calculation of the actual scheme, what it could bring in, etc.
So you're fairly satisfied that your figures are kind of fairly accurate.
We'd be very satisfied. Edel might want to actually speak to
Yeah,
that.
Edel, yeah.
Through the chair, please, now, Casper must keep
Sorry,
up with it. Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, Ms. McGinley, yeah, you want to?
Sorry, I just want to add something. There was also 2 European studies that have been carried out over the last number of years that actually also point to this number, and it is roughly around 30,000 that these 2 European studies, both commissioned by the European Commission, have also pointed to. So in terms of the figures that we've come up with and also the figures that have been put out there by the European Commission, there is a correlation. Now there's a Clandestino project report as well that says it's between 30 and 60,000, so we're on the low end of that spectrum. But we believe that it is, it is in the region that we have put out, and it is supported by these 2 European projects as well.
Okay, Deputy
A second question, Chair, is in relation to, as well as the kind of the whole issue of human rights and diversity in the country, you also make a very strong economic argument to regularise the situation. And I think you said that the scheme would bring in an annual income in excess of 7.5 million through direct taxation. You also said a once-off fee would generate 11.5 million. And then you talk about income brought in through the PRSI contributions would generate about 20 million. And then you were saying that over 5 years, that has potential to generate 180 million. And this to me is a very strong argument as well, because in the current economic climate, there is always issues about revenue and about income. So my question essentially is, would you be fairly solid in relation to your figures there on the income revenue side of it?
Okay. Financial Mr. Lowry. Thank you.
What we've actually done, and Pablo Rojas Capari, our research officer in the Migrant Rights Centre, we were talking about this morning. We have gone with a more conservative estimate because we don't want this to seem that we've blown it up more than it is proportionally. I think it's important. I think it's important to kind of show that this will cost money, because any change we know costs money, but that we maybe can't afford not to do it is the other bit. And the fact that actually not only does it not cost a huge amount, that it actually can bring in an awful lot of money. A lot of people are outside of the formal economy. A scheme such as this, and we took 23,000 as a medium with this, if we took 23,000 as a medium in the calculation of all of this, and we actually only used the minimum wage. Some people we work with are in, some people in Ireland who are undocumented are in high income earning jobs. Many are not, so we took the minimum wage across the bar. We calculated on the basis of people who weren't paying tax, using our current study around that, and looking at if we brought people into a scheme, you're bringing them into the formal economy, and they will then start paying tax. So that's where we got our 7.5 million. We were looking at a fee or a fine of, we like to say like an administrative fee for people, similar to what they proposed in the United States, of €500. You multiply that by 23,000 people, you get 5 million. That does not even take into consideration the fact that if people enter a regularisation scheme and they're given a temporary residence whilst that scheme is administered, they might and probably will, in Jayson's case and many others, go home. That will require paying for a visa. If you were to take even something like a visa multiplied by a small number of people, you could easily generate another, if a small enough number of people of the 23,000 went home, you could easily generate 2.3 million if people went home once a year. If half the people went home once a year. So that's, I suppose what I'm saying is, the 5 million is conservative enough as well. It's just at the level of a fee. People also have an annual fee that you have to pay to GNIB, and it's over 5 years. You have to have your GNIB card in order. That's €300 a year at the moment. So there's even other additionalities in it. I think what we wanted to show was that it's a little bit like maybe some of the myths around some of this is, there are some cost implications, but actually there are far greater benefits economically. It's not just a moral imperative, there's actually an economic imperative too. We're losing out on revenue here. We're wasting money, we're benefiting to some extent from people's labour, but we're missing out on the revenue generated by their tax contribution.
Third question is, maybe I just want to address this specifically to Jayson in relation to your own personal experience and your family's experience. And I was very moved by your lines when you said, when I first left, my youngest was 5. He kept asking when I was coming back. He's 17 now, and he has not stopped asking. Now, we're in the middle of a debate in this House about the Family Relationships Bill, and I just wonder that must have a huge negative impact on you and your children and your family and extended family.
Mr. Montenegro, yeah?
Yeah, it's a big, it's big impact to me, also to my children. So I miss them when they're growing up, and also the time that they are sick, they calling me, and I cannot do anything. And also my son, it's always on Christmases, they always asking me, Dad, this is another Christmas again. Can you come home? Do I know you, Dad? That's the difficult question for me. Do I know you, Dad? It's like my life is stuck on that question because I don't know what can I answer it. But I always answer it, it's for your future. And also for supporting for day-to-day living for my family. And that time also, when my father passed away this month last year, that's the hardest things of my life that I cannot forget. Because my mom rang me on that time that you need to pray. And after 2 minutes, she told me that your dad's passed away. So I want to vanish, and I don't know what to do. But when the hard thing is when I saw my father on the Skype, on the coffin, it's like it's break my heart. It's like there's a knife on my heart that I cannot remove it. I want to go home, but my mom told me, "What about your future of your children? Can you support it?" That's the big decision that I need to make. I want to see my father on the coffin, but how about the future of my children? And
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, we'll come back to you if we need to. Senator Sapone.
And I think this is really important that you've come to us today, so thank you for being here. And again, as Deputy McGraw complimented Migrant Rights Centre on your work, and also Jayson, thank you for your bearing witness. I was a documented migrant for a number of years before I became a citizen, but I never felt threatened in terms of becoming undocumented, and I felt that was because I was from the United States of America. I was white, I was privileged, and middle class. So I think there are equality issues here along with human rights issues in terms of ethical imperative to look at the issue. And just as you spoke, I participated in my father's last rites through telephone. I can't imagine not having been able to have gone to his funeral, though, so I really offer you my sympathy there. One question the first, many, but let's take three. The first one is, have you had engagement with the Department of Justice? Have you, and what have those discussions resulted in terms of your proposals?
Okay.
Actually spoken directly.
I suppose another way of putting that question, if I may, would be, why isn't our movement? What's actually blocking this? Would that be fair?
Yeah. Fair enough. Exactly. Thanks, Chair.
Ms. Lowry, do you want to?
I will, and I'd also like our director, who previously was involved in the campaign as well, in terms of it's almost 5 years old. As the campaign and as our numbers grew and as we started to research what a solution would look like, we did have quite a proactive engagement with the previous administration in terms of Minister Annan Shatter, and the group were actually before the Justice Committee in the past in relation to the introduction of a regularisation. And I suppose really it was a little bit hard to get it up the political agenda. We've had a very proactive engagement with members of the committee in recent times here, and I suppose really what had happened was we also had some good. We have good relationships, working relationships with civil servants in the Department of Justice because of our drop-in centre, because we are on the ground, we're at the coalface, and we got feedback on some of our proposals, and feedback in terms of the possibilities and the cost and the time and what it would take. So we went back to the drawing board a bit and looked at our regularisation proposal in that period, and then I suppose the administration changed some of the relationships. There's a bit of a turnover in terms of staff, and here we are with a new Minister for Justice. So we're in a new phase around some of that, and so it's taken us a little while to get to where we're at right now. Edel,
Want to come in?
to the chair. Sorry.
Yeah, well, just to say we are meeting the Minister for Justice next Monday, so that's a very welcome development, and we have been trying to meet her for some time. I suppose in the past, in terms of engaging with the Department of Justice and maybe the civil servant element or end of it, I mean, we have a good working relationship because we would have campaigned for the introduction of what was the Undocumented Workers Scheme. This responded to people who'd fallen out of the system through no fault of their own. That was a very welcome development. But there is resistance from within the civil service in relation to the implementation of something like this. I can't pretend that there's not. And it really needs political will to drive it forward. And that's really where we really need to get to, because I think there are some blocks within the civil servants to advancing this.
That's it. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Senator, yeah.
And secondly, then you, I mean, that's helpful. You know, you have 2 recommendations for action, one of which is directed to ourselves, maybe, you know, to engage and point to rapporteur, compile recommendations. Do you have any suggestions on, you know, maybe some advice in terms of if we were to decide to do that, you know, who we would bring here? Is there other research that's been done, you know, in Ireland rather? Are you the only ones who's done that? Just maybe a couple comments.
Okay. Who wants to take that? Ms. McGinley.
I can do that. We are the only really organisation working on this issue. We do work with the trade unions and others. I suppose they're very supportive of this, and we have over 40 people who are 40 organisations who are in support of this particular proposal. There isn't research in the Irish context on it either. You would have to probably look at more European experts and bringing in, you know, kind of organisations at a European level. So in terms of, you know, a load of interest groups, I suppose, to bring in, there wouldn't be a huge amount of interest groups, but there are groups who are interested in this and support this area of work. But I suppose we do the bulk of the work in relation to supporting undocumented migrants in Ireland. I don't know how helpful that is.
And then the last question I have is if you could just comment a little bit about, you know, your proposals and how they might interact with. I mean, you do mention direct provision a couple of times in your presentation, and obviously that's being reviewed, et cetera. But just how you know, a regularization scheme to move forward with that while, you know, all of the other challenges are there in terms of the direct provision issue. Have you? Could you comment about that? I suppose really in terms of.
Okay, Ms. Lowry.
I think all of these conversations are happening, obviously, in the absence, which you'll all know very well here, of the Immigration, Residence and Protection Bill. So we're without that overarching legislation, and that's probably why we're kind of having some of the conversations we've been having around immigration reform and single procedure and all. This scheme does not require legislation. However, you know, there is, and we're very hopeful of. I know there's a proposal out at the moment in terms of a proposal to clear the backlog. People currently in DP would be very supportive of that. We see the 2 schemes as very complementary, but I suppose what we're putting out there is more comprehensive. It's for not just certain types. It's the concept of being undocumented, and we're saying one of the primary criteria would be length of time in the state followed by a probationary period. So we don't think that would necessarily be confusing, but I suppose the devil would be in the detail, and that's a conversation to have if we get down to the fine detail of what it would look like in its rollout, the implications it might have for people with ongoing applications or not. But we actually think the current review of direct provision is timely in that we're at a stage now, again, 15 years, almost 2 decades into inwards migration from a humanitarian and an economic perspective, where we can't kind of afford to ignore some of this stuff. So we feel it's actually timely, and because it doesn't require legislation, it's an opportunity to look at it.
Okay, Ms. McGinley, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just one further point. I suppose there are people who are in the direct provision system who are undocumented. So clearly this corresponds to that. They may be on a deportation order for whatever reason, and that has not been enforced. So there is definitely a crossover. So they do have to be mindful of each other, but I suppose there's a great opportunity in this, because one is being enacted, probably will be enacted in the course of the rest of the government. So.
Ms. Lowry, you want to come back in briefly?
I'm just conscious as well, just another point to add to Senator Sapone's earlier question around, groups or expertise. I think, as Edel said, we'd have to look, there is expertise at a global level and internationally that we would have accessed in terms of like the Migration Policy Institute and others who have looked at, different forms of regularisations, and we've probably done quite a snapshot of that and used what we felt was the most relevant to it in developing our own regularisations work over the years. So there is others, and we're also a member of PICUM, the European platform around undocumented, and our director's actually on the board of PICUM. So there is that linkage as well.
Okay.
I would be in favour in principle of your proposals for regularization.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. Deputy Collins.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks to our guests, Edel, Helen and Jayson for your input. Just to say that I and my party support the policy or the concept of a scheme for the undocumented. Can I ask if you could just expand on the figure of 26,000 approximate, the geographical spread, if you would have any detail on the geographical spread. I presume the vast majority of those are urban and Dublin based. If you had any detail in relation to the spread across the regions.
Okay. Have you any ideas to where the geographical spread is?
Research, Deputy Collins, was carried out. It was all over Ireland, but it was predominantly it was through our members and through people involved in the campaign. So a lot of it was in the greater Dublin area, but it wasn't only that, because it was through word of mouth and through communities, which is a great way of getting the word out there. So, for example, Jayson's got a lot of colleagues and friends in Cork, so it was all Ireland. I don't have the breakdown actually, but it was predominantly the Greater Dublin area. However, we know well from our drop-in centre, and because we're meeting between a third and a half of the people coming through our doors on a yearly basis are undocumented. They're all over, living and working in towns up and down the length and breadth of the country. We have people who are coming up from Mayo to get advice and information. We handle an awful lot of phone calls. So we feel that it's definitely not just an urban phenomenon, like people are undocumented. I've got a lot of calls from my own hometown in Ballina, County Mayo, because people know I'm working with the Migrant Rights Centre, people who are working in everything from, hotel and catering to community development work, who are undocumented and looking for advice. So it's definitely not just a phenomenon in terms of a big city. Your question, sorry, in relation to the 20 to 26,000. Did you want to go into the breakdown again? I know I mentioned earlier, but I can if you wanted to. Yeah, if you can, yeah. Okay. We calculated first first of all, it's possible to calculate the number of people on deportation orders since the enactment of the Immigration Act in 1999. There's been 22,459 deportation orders signed, of which 4,564 were enforced. Therefore, we can estimate that there were 17,895 non-enforced deportation orders in Ireland presently. We can also estimate that the rate of voluntary return of migrants is 13.8%, and the source from that is from ongoing meetings we've had with the Department of Justice and data we've been able to glean from the department, which means 2,470 of the estimated 17,895 non-enforced deportation orders would have left Ireland voluntarily. So in terms of just the deportation order, therefore an estimated 15,425 people have non-enforced deportation orders in Ireland currently, and it's an informed estimate. Then in terms of visa overstayers, as I mentioned earlier on, that's a harder figure to calculate because, as you saw from our research, over 90% of people we surveyed were not in a formal process with the state. They're just getting on with their lives, just like the Irish in the United States. They're not in a process of legally doing something about their situation. So just to kind of, don't want to bore people to tears, but it is important, visa overstayers or undetected migrants in the state include tourists, people from non-visa required countries, student visa holders and others. If we use coefficients, happy to make this available to the committee afterwards, if we use coefficients from research conducted by Gordon et al. In 2009, just I'll give you the title, Economic Impact on London and UK Economy of an Earned Regularisation of Irregular Migrants to the UK, we can make a very informed estimate of the number of undetected migrants in Ireland. We don't really use that language, so I'm just using the language of the report, undetected migrants. The research study identifies a coefficient to calculate the number of undetected migrants based on the numbers of undocumented migrants known to the authorities. So it's a residual method. And and it calculates coefficients. The study was pioneered in the UK, offers the most appropriate measurement tool, as the UK has the most similar immigration system, geographic boundaries and immigration flows to Ireland. So from that then we were able to look at the 15,000 I mentioned in terms of deportation orders. We were able to use that along with other data from Justice to do a coefficient sample of that in terms of the estimate. So based on the residual methodology, the following calculations can be made. A low estimate coefficient, which would be 9.58%, you're looking at 1,796. A medium coefficient, 22%, 4,279 migrants. So you correspond that with numbers of undocumented people coming through the drop-in centre. A high estimate coefficient, 36%, has been chosen, resulting in an estimate of 6,761 undetected migrants in Ireland. So we use that coefficient. We selected the coefficient, and then we use that coefficient to estimate undetected. So if you then add undetected with what we know of, you then get to extrapolate between 20 and 26,000, and that's where we were saying between 20 and 26, because we're saying low, medium and high. The children bit's important. I mean, coefficients were obtained from the study to calculate the number of UK-born children as a percentage of the overall undocumented population. These coefficients, when applied to various estimates of undocumented migrants in Ireland, generated the following figures. And we had a figure of 2,400, again low, 3,672 medium, and 5,100 in terms of high, which is why we've been saying consistently that we estimate there's between 2,000 and 5,000 undocumented children in Ireland, which is obviously very hard to do because they're children and they're not anywhere registered and won't be till they're older. So that's some of the rigour that's behind our figures.
That sounds quite scientific, actually. Deputy Collins.
Thanks. What's the experience of the most recent scheme to regularise undocumented? Is it European or is it international scheme? Where was it, or when was it?
Best practice internationally.
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. McGinley.
Well, our most recent scheme was the undocumented worker scheme in 2009, and that responded to people who fell out of the work permit system, and that was a very successful scheme. It was time-bound and limited as well. It has now been actually put on a statutory footing, which is now called the reactivation scheme, which is currently being administered by the Department of Jobs at the moment. One of the most recent schemes was in Belgium, and that was a broad-based scheme. There was a number of problems with that because it was an amnesty. So what happened with that particular scheme, there was a huge backlog. So it actually took about 2 years to clear the backlog, because it had each case had to be assessed at the point of entry to the scheme. So what we're proposing with this probationary period, that you're given a 2-year period for the department to actually assess schemes over a given period of time, that it doesn't have to be a once-off kind of everybody in at a bottleneck. So that's what happened in the Belgium scheme. So some people 3 years later were still not regularised, and yet they were entitled to be regularised. And so another piece of important learning from that was the type of immigration status that a person is given when they're regularised. Part of that scheme gave people work permits, and part of the scheme gave people full access to the labour market. The ones who were given work permits to work became undocumented again, because there was a huge amount of problems with getting work permits with unscrupulous employers. So what is given to people when they do become regularised is actually very, very important, because we either set people up to fail, or we set up people up to achieve something. So some of the key learning from the Belgian regularisation was, don't create a bottleneck and give a stamp that actually helps people realise what they're going to be regularised properly.
Sorry, Lowry, briefly.
Sorry, to the Chair, there's been over 40 large-scale regularisations across the European Union in the last 10 years alone.
Okay.
If you have information on that, you may pass it on to the clerk for us, please, if that's possible. Deputy Collins, final question.
Just to clarify, your scheme is going to give a stamp 4, is it, at the end?
Yes.
Yeah. Just my last question then. You mentioned, Edel, you mentioned the crossover between the undocumented and the people in direct provision. Now, my understanding is that people who are in direct provision aren't undocumented because they're in a process already. So can you straighten out that one for me?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I mean, there's a couple of things. I suppose there has there's the backlog in direct provision of cases that are ongoing and ongoing. There are also people who may have received negative decisions. So you start with your asylum claim, you go to subsidiary protection, and then you go to humanitarian leave to remain. If that humanitarian leave to remain application was unsuccessful, but your case may be at the point when you came as an asylum seeker, you ended up in a case for humanitarian leave to remain. That case might now be undocumented, but the country that you come from, you may be unreturnable, so the principle of non-refoulement. So there are a number of countries where you cannot be returned to. So people who may be on a deportation order, they can't be returned to their country of origin because of a number of different reasons. We would consider those people to be undocumented as well. So there is a crossover. We don't know how much, but it is a consideration in this. So yeah.
Okay, can I just ask a question, if I may, just on that? How many people in that category who are under the deportation orders and you can't be sent back because of whatever issues happening in their own country, strife or war or whatever?
Yeah.
Do you know any idea?
We wouldn't have any figures on that, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Right.
it's very hard to know.
All right.
Thank you.
Questions?
First of all, thank you all for coming in, and thank you, Jayson, for sharing your story. And I'm sorry about the loss of your father, and you're very welcome here today, and as are the people in the audience. I wish I could say as a nation we were more welcoming to people and people in direct provision as well. I know, having lost 2 members of my family in the last 14 months, how difficult it is and how extraordinarily difficult it must have been for you. I support your proposal in principle, absolutely, and I have a couple of questions. My first question is, you said that civil servants are not, I can't understand why everybody doesn't want to support it. And I'm just wondering, can you tell me, give me an idea as to who doesn't support it and why? No, but not names, but I mean, as a group, are there groups of people that don't support it, and what's the idea behind not supporting it? Why would anybody not support?
No, we can't identify or criticise.
No, I don't want you, obviously, don't name anybody, obviously. But
sorry, Deputy.
policy.
Sorry, please. Sorry, I just want to make that very clear.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Right.
I mean, the state operates a managed migration system. So within that, there's obviously considerations. I'm not going to make the arguments for why managed migration is a good or bad thing. But I suppose there is, until this becomes a political issue, until there is political will behind it, the people who are there to develop policies and implement policies would be reticent to do so until they're actually directed by the minister to do that. And the only way they can be directed is that if there's political will behind it, and and this is part of it, if this committee supports the regularisation, then it would naturally mean that the civil servants have to come up with a solution and move their position. And it's not, I suppose, part of their role is to develop and implement an immigration system. So unless they're told otherwise or directed otherwise, that this is part, and it is part of a managed migration system, any managed migration system, all countries have to do a regularisation, different types of regularisations at some point in the lifetime of their immigration history. Some have to do more because they don't get it right and they're bigger countries. Look at America, it has to do a huge one. But as we said, there's 40 different ones across the European Union. So we won't change, it doesn't matter really. The civil servants will react and respond to a political will.
Basically what you're saying is that the civil service follow the policy decisions of the minister
Yes.
and the government and their office. Ms. Lowry, you want to come back in on that?
I suppose that's why we think this presentation today is very, very important, and that's why we think in the Justice for the Undocumented group, which has now got 900 members, it started with 6 people, the man to my left, the woman to my right, and 4 other individuals. I remember it well. It's 900 members now. That's why we think this work is very important. It's a lot more expensive to deport somebody. So I suppose we have to, and our job is to make this a problem. problem. People aren't causing trouble here. They're infringing, on immigration policy. It's an administrative infringement. However, people aren't going, and that's the other thing. That's why we think this is a good idea, because it actually makes more sense economically. But from a civil service perspective, many would be very aware that this is a reality. But doing something about it requires, as Edel has said quite clearly, a lot of, a political will.
Okay, thank you. Second question?
Yeah, I greatly admire the work that the MRCI do, and I meet regularly people in my clinic who are in the situation, whether that it is a work visa has run, a student visa or a holiday visa has run out, and they have a break and they don't know where to go next. I've come across people, several people who have had people so-called helping them with their paperwork and charging them for that. And I'm just wondering, do you come across, anybody that comes to me now with that I can't help, I would send them to yourselves, because I know that there are people out there who are charging people to help them with their paperwork. One particular person came to me and was told by somebody else to get a letter from me to say that that person had worked for me and that I was happy with their work. Now, I couldn't write that letter, obviously, because I wouldn't be a registered employer and the other person hadn't paid tax. I'm just wondering, do you come across that on a regular basis, and are the undocumented being exploited like that all of the time?
Absolutely. Sorry, yeah, absolutely. We do come across a lot of, I think really we're working with people who are more on the margins of the labour market and who are often, you're coming from non-EU, so therefore you're a non-EU migrant, therefore you require permission to live and work in the country. And we have found third-party recruitment a problem over the years, particularly for people who are in harder to reach sectors, harder to reach jobs. People we're working with are generally not members of the trade union movement because they're in less regulated sectors. Not all, but just a lot of the people we're working with are more vulnerable to non-compliant employers, unscrupulous employers, and also bad recruitment practices. So whether that's a third party, an actual company, or individuals. And I mean, that's probably part of the migration journey from the beginning of time. If we think of Irish labourers going over and their first couple of weeks' salary were given to the person who got them the job on the site. And there's a little bit of that in between as well. But I suppose in terms of bad practice, in terms of maybe people going somewhere and getting legal advice and paying for it, or poor representation in that area, we have in the past and do report people, particularly if they're a registered firm or if they're registered practitioners of the law, for example, or whatever. There are places where you can make those complaints and have people blacklisted.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you. Yeah, it's very brief. Are you only based in Dublin? Do you ever do a roving clinic kind of thing around the country? People can't always travel to Dublin to meet you, and it's not ideal for somebody who doesn't have great English to speak on the phone. I just wondered, do you ever come do a tour of the country?
Okay. Okay, can you, sorry, Ms. McGinley, you want to answer that final question?
We do and we don't. We do outreach to certain places around the country, so Galway, Cork, Gort in the past, because it had a very high undocumented population. We do engage with a lot of different organisations around the country, Meath and other places. We would do kind of information sessions for people, but we very much engage with the Citizens Information Network, and we would provide a support service to the Citizens Information Network and the CIB as well, so that they can, if there's queries locally, that we support those queries, so we don't have to be in every location, because there already are people in those locations, and we support that work. We also work very much with community sector organisations who might be also on the ground to engage vulnerable migrants and to do work with vulnerable migrants.
Okay.
You're welcome in Athlone.
Thank you very much. Just very briefly, one or two questions for myself, if I may. You did mention, you said the people which should be here for all persons resident in Ireland 4 years would be eligible to register in the scheme, 3 years with children. What about people who are less than 4 years or less than 3 years with children? What's the story there? What's your proposal for those?
It's a very good question. We had a lot of discussions in the Justice for the Undocumented campaign group about this with members and persons, and I suppose it's that line between what we can organise behind and is politically possible, and also what's realistic as well. I mean, what we found is that irregular migration or being undocumented is a global reality. And after a period of time, most countries realise they need to do something about it. And we've been saying this for quite a while in terms of our work in this area, but felt that we had to put forward criteria that was realistic. We would have liked, we tossed around a couple of different ideas. I suppose we felt that anyone who was here 6 months or a year, for example, or less than 2 years, it was very hard to advocate that they be in the same situation as somebody here 12 years. That's not to say somebody who's here less than 4 years shouldn't be able to be eligible for this scheme, and that's something that requires a bit of further consideration, I would imagine.
Okay. Any idea of the numbers involved there? And yes, you've given assessments already for the overall number between 2026. How many people are here less than 4 years?
That's again a very good question. What I would point back to is a recent analysis we did of our. Sorry, just get this in front of me. A recent analysis we did of our drop-in centre, and as I said, we dealt with nearly 2,700 people, just under 5 years, a period of May 2009 to October 2014. That's quite a substantial number of individuals from 96 different countries living here on average 8 years. So I suppose what we're finding is, increasing people are less likely to be here a shorter period. So, for example, since the enlargement of the European Union, or managed migration policy, in terms of work permits, eligible categories, Ireland is no longer, a country of inwards migration to the same extent it was in the so-called boom years. So, non-EU migrants migrating to Ireland to work, those figures have reduced, substantially, and we still have a high percentage of international students coming to live and work, but they don't necessarily all end up undocumented or outside of their status.
Okay, so.
If I just add to that, I suppose kind of since the recession, and I think I said earlier on that migration is driven by employment and family reunification. So when our recession hit, people knew there wasn't a huge amount of employment here. What we did see was a reduction in those networks of migration, and we know this from our drop-in centre, kind of who was coming. So there wasn't a huge amount of people coming after that time, but there are some. So they do need consideration also.
One other issue that comes up again and again when somebody applies to either to stay here is the cost to this state of health, education in particular, and possibly other social services like social welfare. Have you factored those costs in at all to your calculations that you put before us earlier on?
Well, I think the big one was probably around social protection in terms of benefits.
Well, education, on third level in particular, quite expensive.
I'll come to that. I think the social protection one is obviously that's dependent on your contributions. So right now people just aren't, and the decision might need to be made about that 2-year probationary period. But you earn your access to social welfare. So I think that won't kick in until down the line when people are long term in the country and have their status and have their stamp 4 and in terms of education, we previously worked very closely with young people, children of non-EU migrants. It was around the Migrant Education Access campaign, MIA, and that was on access to third level for children of non-EU migrants. Now, our access to third level is completely built around citizenship, so you have to be a citizen in order to qualify for, we say free fees, but they're no longer really free in terms of the level of the registration fee. So we did a guesstimate actually on that. We did, quite a good costed analysis of how much it would cost the Minister for Education at the time, Minister Lowry to implement changes in that regard. And it was a fraction of the education budget, because what it really was about allowing people who were long-term in the country. Now, again, this would be about their parents' status, so it probably wouldn't apply here straight away. Their parents would have to be legally resident. But the system does, you have to have citizenship. And unless we see a bit of a change around that you, for example, if you're 10 years legally resident in the country, that you have some sort of a right of access to, say, the free fees category, then, that might kick in, but it still won't apply because young people won't have been legally resident. So it's actually probably back to the Immigration Residency Protection Bill. It's a conversation between the Department of Education and Justice, because it's a bigger matter, because the system is still built around citizenship.
Okay, any final comments? Okay, well, thank you very much for being here today. We really, sorry?
Say again, on behalf of the Justice for the Undocumented campaign and the Migrant Rights Centre, we're just really happy to be here today. We really appreciate the time taken also by the clerks of the committee, who've been very good to us. It's a big day out for us. People have taken time off work, even just to be in the gallery. And we're working very, very hard around St. Patrick's Day and for the rest of this year to have momentum on this issue. You know, some very insightful questions were asked about why this hasn't maybe got somewhere else around about this period. And that's why we're here today. We're hoping that there'll be political will behind this now. We think our solution is quite pragmatic.
Sure,
And
well,
we
thank you for
appreciate
that
the opportunity.
and for being here. As you probably know, this committee is extraordinarily busy. We have a
Yes.
huge agenda and an awful lot of legislation and other work that we've been ongoing with over the last while. But again, it's been very interesting and very insightful to hear what you said, and we certainly will take it under consideration and consider in the next while what action we will take. You mentioned a number of issues regarding rapporteur and others, and we'll certainly have a look at that. So thanks for being here today. And okay, we'll now go into a private session. Is that agreed to do with some housekeeping matters? Okay, private session.